Ultimately, it's all about solving problems on behalf of the enterprise. This is a team sport, a capability that everybody can learn.
What are the hardest conversations that you're having now?
I think the hardest conversations are
Vijay Sankaran, Chief Digital and Information Officer over at Johnson Controls, transforming buildings into intelligent, self-optimizing environments. What is the smartest building you've seen in action today?
the smartest buildings in the world. It really is about pervasive computing. That starts before that person even enters in the building.
You've talked about generative AI boom being a gold rush of opportunity.
Either be a surfer or be a pioneer. Either surf the wave of AI or be a pioneer and get on to the next thing. What would take hundreds of people months to do, now we can do in a matter of days using these new AI technologies.
What's a message that all leaders and their teams need to hear?
I would say
Welcome back to CEO Tech Live, brought to you by Hexaware. So what if the spaces we live and work in could actually think for themselves, making life safer, greener, and more efficient without us even asking? Well, enter Vijay Sankaran, who is the Chief Digital and Information Officer over at Johnson Controls, where he leads over 2,500 technologists transforming buildings into intelligent, self-optimizing environments. This is actually his second appearance on the show, and you're in for something special today because through the OpenBlue platform, VJ is bringing AI, edge computing, and cloud innovation to a sector that's actually responsible for 40% of global emissions, cutting that footprint by 10 to 15% per building. With $25 billion in revenue and global reach, Johnson Controls truly sets the pace for sustainable infrastructure. VJ is also a recognized voice in the generative AI space, featured by the New York Times and Fortune for his forward-thinking yet responsible approach to AI at scale. And recently he's also been named to the AI 150 by Constellation. VJ, welcome back to CEO Tech Live.
it's great to be on here again.
Well, let's kick this off. So what's your leadership vision now as Chief Digital and Information Officer?
Well, when we constructed this role, and I'm so fortunate to have the combination of these capabilities between, the actual digital experience transformation, the software transformation, the AI and data, and the technology systems all put together. The way that it was conceived is, we at Johnson Controls have been on a journey of transforming experiences for our customers and our employees for a few years now. But looking at this holistically, especially with this onset of AI, coming to fruition and data really being at the center of everybody's change, it began to make sense to bring all of those pieces together in a holistic role that looks at digital transformation across the entire enterprise, from the customer work, which I was doing previously with OpenBlue, and some of the acquisitions that we did, all the way back to how we're actually serving our employees, inclusive of frontline personnel, who are, servicing our customers, commercial folks who are working with, new capabilities for our customers, our factory employees to make those manufacturing operations more effective, and, our day-to-day 100,000+ employees who are trying to, make Johnson Controls a better place to be, for our customers and all the people that work here across the enterprise. And so, when we thought about the role, the power that now, with the combination of software, AI, and data that can be brought to the table to really drive an enterprise digital transformation, made a lot of sense. And that was sort of the conception of, why we decided to create the role. And, and I feel very fortunate and grateful that, I can lead this on behalf of Johnson Controls.
Yeah, I mean, organizations and leaders take note. I mean, there's really no longer the IT department that's like a whole fractured function from the rest of the organization, and it is everywhere. And there has to be a unified vision on where this thing's headed, or you're going to end up with a bunch of functions buying different technologies for HR, for marketing, for finance, and they're not going to be talking to each other, right? And how can you deliver for the customer in this world without a unified vision? Now, what do you do to come up with a big vision like that? Where before, you were the like CIO thinking about IT, and now it's thinking about a vision that's unifying every single employee, every single process. What do you do to get there? Get to that
Yeah,
point?
I mean, when I think about it, ultimately it's all about solving problems on behalf of the enterprise.
Hmm.
And I remember one of the first things, that I tackled, as I got into this new role was, many companies like ours, have grown up through a set of acquisitions, and
Hmm.
inevitably,
Yep.
in an industrial company, there's always this specter of a big ERP project, or multiple ERP
Oh
projects,
yes, I've
we're
been there.
spending X millions of
Yeah.
dollars on the ERP project or the mother of all ERP projects, right? And I just asked kind of some simple questions, or what I thought was a simple question around, well, why are we doing this? Like,
Hmm.
what is the purpose of this? Who is this going to
Hmm.
benefit from, a stakeholder standpoint? How are we going to get better as a company by doing this, right? Really unpacking, the why behind, the investment and the capability that was being built. And,
Hmm.
I started to get, the kind of answers that, maybe was okay or accepted or tolerated in the past, which was, well, we need to build a single ERP. Well, that's just, a strategy that was developed 3 years ago,
Yep.
and, we're mitigating risks. And, as I started to unpack all of that, what came to light is that, from a business stakeholder standpoint, they were not seeing a lot of value in terms of what was going on with this initiative.
Hmm.
And we were spending a lot of money, and, we were mitigating some risks, but, maybe not the ones that we really needed to mitigate. And it had taken a long time and not really delivered a lot of value. And so,
Hmm.
when you think about,
Hmm.
going forward and the agenda that you set as a person in this role,
Yeah.
in my mind, it's all about value driven, leadership and value driven digital. And, when I say that, it is how are we leveraging software, and software could be software that we develop or
Yeah.
software that comes
Hmm.
to us from the standpoint of, our partners like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Microsoft and Oracle and many others. It could be, the data that is used to enrich. I kind of think of data as the nutrients of an organization. And then now the AI that layers on top of that in terms of really optimizing and transforming those processes. And so then you take a step back and you say, okay, which
Hmm.
processes have the biggest opportunity for improvement in the enterprise, like
Yep.
Johnson Controls? And
Hmm.
we are very fortunate to have a new CEO that's come on board, who really brings to the table, a mindset of lean. And one of the beautiful things is that in this new notion of a digital transformation for the enterprise and lean, there's really a lot of synergies in the sense that lean is all about, process simplification, process improvement, problem solving. And what we're trying to do now with digital is all about how do you solve those problems and scale them across the enterprise using, the different technologies that I talked about, software, data, and AI. And
Hmm.
so that becomes sort of the new, I would say, playbook for the modern chief digital and information officer is, how do you transform processes across the enterprise? How do you transform experiences for your customers using software, data, and AI? And so that's really, how I've gone about, developing the vision. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you have to do in this kind of role in terms of, are you optimizing the use of the resources that you have? Are you investing properly? Are you mitigating risks around things like cybersecurity? Are you building the right platforms to be able to enable that digital transformation? I mean, those are all critical enablers of what we want to do. But fundamentally, if I look at it from outside in, which is absolutely the right way to look at it, what processes, what value streams are we seeking to improve across our enterprise using software, data, and AI? That is what is going to set apart, the great companies for our future from the good companies, in the future. And, not stealing a parable from Jim Collins, but, I do think that is the future of transformation.
How are you think? So you mentioned the 3-year ERP project, and probably there are like 1 million people listening right now. They're like, oh yeah, I know that project, but it was a 5-year ERP. like it takes
How about
forever.
15-year ERPs?
Right. And in that time, the world changes. It's almost laughable, right? To think, oh, I 3 years ago, I knew what was going to happen in IT. We got served up this AI rapid change, which probably melted down so many ERPs. And in terms of how that was going to be, like what the vision is going to be. How are you thinking about the changes and the different processes that you're trying to transform when you really, I mean, you're sort of rolling the dice on how things are going to look by the end of it? Or do you thinking, what we're going to do, we're looking at this thing in tiny increments and not 3, 4, 5-year increments, because we can't plan that far ahead?
Well, I think that's a great question, Ben. And I mean, I think it inherently, right? Businesses are dynamic. I mean, businesses are buying other businesses, businesses are selling other businesses, businesses are splitting.
Yes.
I mean, things that you
You
could
guys
have
know this
taken
well.
things that you could have you would have taken for granted, that General Electric, which was, Thomas Edison's company, right, was going to be one company for the history of humanity, right? If you asked somebody in the 80s or 90s, they would have been, the Crotonville Kingdom is going to be Camelot, for the history of humanity, right? But, now you look at it, right? And I mean, Larry Culp is an American icon at this point. He's come in and he's restructured into 3 more efficient businesses. And that's the dynamic nature of business today, which is what used to be maybe you could count on being there for at least a decade, maybe 2, you can't count on for being there for a year now. That's how dynamic, society is. And so technology needs to adapt in the same way, which is, and also recognize that, having some degree of complexity in your landscape is inherently the reality that we're going to live in. And that's okay. There's no perfect in terms of a systems landscape. I mean, I remember back in the day when I first started as a technology professional, all these architects would draw, single systems for everything. And, there were nice, beautiful pictures. And then we would set forth on these, as you said, on 5-year, 10-year, whether they were ERP or major program initiatives. And, we would inevitably in year 3 lose sight of what we were trying to actually accomplish after spending a lot of money, right? And so what I say is that, those beautiful pictures that architects used to draw out, they're no longer relevant. We generally need to have a North Star of where we're going towards. But, I think you use the word micro increments. And so, I really try to now break down, the planning for IT, digital, in yearly increments with the optionality that on a quarterly basis, I can pivot that and make adjustments to what we actually want to get accomplished, in a given year. So, for example, I'm looking at our ERP investments for 2026 right now, and I'm saying, hey, what are the 3 or 4 things that, moves the chessboard forward with a few moves that reduces risks and improves business performance, that the business actually feels like, hey, if I got this thing, it would make my business be better. And then also looking at tools that using AI and tools like Palantir or Microsoft Foundry and saying, okay, how can I assemble the data that I have in a way in terms of delivering value, against these, more lean processes, much more quickly than I would if I were going to do a major systems implementation. I mean, I'll give you an example where, in our procurement processes, we have a lot of ERPs, but by using, we're doing a pilot now with Palantir where we've been able to, integrate data across, 26, 30 systems in a very short period of time, bring it together and, in a single PO view that, our procurement organization can then disposition, and so that shows you the new power of these new capabilities that exist, in our world now with AI. Same thing I could tell you with Microsoft Foundry, where, we were able to take a whole bunch of drawings and basically use AI to identify, different, points of design, in those drawings and by just training a few drawings. And so what would take hundreds of people weeks to do or months to do, now we can do in a matter of days using these new AI technologies. So the need to kind of do these long range 5-year ERP initiatives that often cost, close to $1 billion or more. My personal belief is it's no longer necessary. You need to upgrade your systems. You need to have a maintainable, system that is, mitigates your cyber risk. You need to have the talent that can support those systems. And, you need to basically invest in some of these AI platforms that's going to allow you to basically assemble a view that, is adding value to your business. And so that's really how, in my opinion, the world is changing so rapidly as we go forward that, people need to prepare for.
Well, you're steering a big ship. And I think a lot of people that have smaller companies are like, oh, yeah, I get Vijay, what he's talking about. Yeah, we want to be like that. But then you're speaking to these other big company leaders. And so on one side of the meter, they might be experiencing this as excitement. Their employees are excited. There's AI, there's all these new tools. The world is our oyster. Then the other part of the spectrum is this is stressing me out. I got to get all these people doing other things, thinking differently to seize the opportunity. And we have shareholders and customers. How are you talking to your team, your 2,500 people about this? So they're not in the stress zone. They're in the excitement zone.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think, the first thing is that I talk to people about the fact that this is a team sport. This is a capability that everybody can learn. Let's put our hands on keyboards, and actually play with this stuff. Let's experiment with this stuff, and one of the things I ask for, when I meet with my teams is, how is everybody leveraging AI to improve the way that they work, right? And then always, really connecting it back to a business-centric view, right? How are we helping a customer? How are we helping a technician? How are we helping, somebody in the front lines? How is this improving, improving somebody's life on a day-to-day basis, and to do a better job, right? That creates more opportunities for them. And so, by utilizing the language of value, Ben, that's where I believe it really resonates with the team. It's like, we're trying to create value for our business. We're trying to, not only help with the bottom line, but also help with the top line using technology, making people more productive, making people more efficient, enabling our customers to solve problems, utilizing these very, very powerful new technologies that are coming together, in a new digital soup that, can, cure some ailments out there.
What are the hardest conversations that you're having now?
I think the hardest conversations are really mindset conversations, right? Because I think for the history of digital and IT, of which I've been fortunate to be a central part of for many years, is that we always, I always have felt that digital IT software, they're like it's the engine on the train. All right, it's pulling the train, right? Yeah. And yet most of the people that we work with are passengers on that train. Some of them are in the first compartment, and some of them are in the last compartment. But you got to pull them all along, And so I still do believe that the digital competency divide, within an organization, especially an industrial organization, is large. People that understand how technology can help them versus people that don't understand how these technologies can help them. And I would say those are the fun and challenging conversations because, I think people jump to a conclusion about, oh, this system needs to be fixed, or this needs to be done, or that needs to be done. And, part of my feedback to them is time out, guys. Like, well, what problem are we actually trying to solve here? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we trying to, improve the business? Do we need to do all of those things? And so, as our new CEOs come in, we're all going through a little bit of lean training these days, and there's a concept in there called the 5 whys, and I find myself practicing my 5 whys more than ever, which is
brutal.
Why do we need to do it this way? And why are you advocating for that approach? And why do you think that'll solve that problem? Right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So. Maybe tools that I should have used more with my kids when they were growing up. Now I find myself, in the middle of using, in a lot of business conversations.
Oh, I remember my Honeywell days getting in my first 5 why experience, and it was worse than going to the dentist. It was really painful.
But it's interesting. Why didn't we think that way in the first place, right, Ben? Like, why don't we just like that? It seems so natural to ask those questions, but everybody's like, you just need to go fix Selection Navigator and everything will be good. I'm like, well, why do you think that approach is the right approach?
Well, all right. So you mentioned kids and all that stuff. So give us some insights, how you're thinking about if you were a high school student today graduating, and I believe you have one, what are the skills from high school to college and how they think about college now with AI and the technology world and the digitization? And then also a second question is, what are the skills they need to develop now to be successful when they come out of college 4 years from now?
I mean, that's a fantastic question, Ben. And I mean, that's something that, having, 2 boys and 2 girls, the boys being, of one going to college and one in college, we have a lot of conversations about. And kind of the macro level guidance that I've given them is, either be a surfer or be a pioneer. And I'll explain those 2 archetypes, because I think that they're really, really important.
Okay.
If you're going to be a surfer, you need to ride the wave of AI. And what I mean by riding the wave of AI is you need to really lean in, and you need to be like, how am I going to use AI to do everything, that I'm doing? How am I going to learn how to push AI to do vibe coding? How am I going to use AI to, just understand all of the capabilities, whether it's on image generation, video generation, different kinds of coding using Python code. My son asked me, who's going to be a junior in college. He asked me, like, should I take a Python course? Is Python is going to be, I think, obsoleted by AI? And I said, yes, but you need to learn to understand how Python works so that when you use AI to build something with Python, that you understand the structure, the types of questions to ask, basically the semantic understanding of how it's all put together. And so that's what I mean. That's one archetype, surf the wave of AI, right? Go all in. The other one is, more of the conversation I had with my second son, who's going to college, and that is be a pioneer. And by being a pioneer is that, I look at the way that the world has evolved, over the last, 40 years since I first, started using computers back in the early 80s. And everything is built upon everything else. And while we think that GPT, is generative AI, it might be an end game. It's just the next game, and then there will be another next game. And that next game may be quantum computing. That next game may be, robotics sitting on top of generative AI. It certainly will be something in the field of energy and how do we sustain the voracious appetite for energy that AI is already creating. And I mean, Microsoft just recently announced that they were way behind on their sustainability targets that they had committed to because of AI. And so that's what I mean by, being a pioneer. And if you really want to say, hey, I'm going to outrun, being inside of this AI wave, go into one of those fields and really understand AI, but also, really put your energy into what's next, and I feel like, feels like, biocomputing and, nuclear engineering 2.0 and quantum computing and next gen robotics are still, going to be, important cornerstones in society as we go forward. So math, physics, those kinds of fields. But by all means, the worst place to be if you're someone coming out of high school or college is to be swallowed by the wave of AI. So that's the place you don't want to be, which is doing a job every day that you're not asking yourself the question every day, like, oh my God, like really thinking about what if AI took over this job? What would I do? Right. So, I believe strongly that, eat or be eaten. And so I would rather focus my time and energy on learning how I might be eaten so that, I can eat my way with knowledge to what, how I adapt, in that particular circumstance. And that would be my one overriding theme if I was, giving a commencement address is like, either surf the wave of AI and what's next, or, be a pioneer and get on to the next thing.
Well, it's a message that all grads need to hear, and also really all leaders and their teams need to hear, because it's really a lifestyle change, and how we, we're no, like what I hear in it is, hey, don't be a bystander. Don't read about AI in the Wall Street Journal and not be using it yourself and thinking about how it impacts your life and your business, because it's not it just sounds like it's AI is a contact sport. You got to be in it and playing in it, not just watching from the stands. And I love, your quote. You've talked about generative AI, the generative AI boom being a gold rush of opportunity, and we got to get out there. You've also said, and dang it, we just didn't have enough time to talk about smart buildings, but I love this question. So you've said that buildings may become autonomous before cars. Okay. What is the smartest building you've seen in action today? And does it actually, like, what does the future look like of these buildings? So maybe paint the picture of what you've seen so far. And
Well,
then
I
where
mean,
the
there are
city can
many
go.
buildings, in the Middle East and Asia, notably in places like Dubai and Singapore that I would consider to be, very intelligent. And I'm going to be actually headed off to Singapore here in the next month or so. And so I'll have the opportunity to, further see how
Hmm.
smart that they've become, right? But there's this old, piece of research that was done at a famous company back in the 80s called Xerox PARC. And
Hmm.
there was a gentleman who wrote the paper whose name was Mark Weiser. And, he wrote about pervasive computing, and that is computing that senses and responds to humans and how they interact, with
Hmm.
the surrounding environments. And so if you think about the smartest buildings in the world, it really is about pervasive computing. How do I sense and respond and
Hmm.
contextualize, the human that is occupying those spaces, right? And that starts before that person even enters in the building, right?
Hmm.
Their own preference of where they want to sit inside the building, right? What is going to be the space that they were assigned, who are they going to be sitting around? Are they sitting around people and colleagues that they can efficiently do work with? Do they need transportation to the space? Is that
That,
transportation
that's
going to
happening
be?
today.
Yeah, I mean, can I have a shuttle pick me up? Or can I use a mobile app to schedule an Uber so I get to the office on time? Or
Hmm.
sharing that's been provided. And then when I get in there, I don't have to pick out a badge out of my wallet, but it uses biometrics or a handprint like we do at Whole Foods these days to scan into the facilities.
Hmm.
Then I get a notification on my phone that says which elevator should I go to get up to my floor. I can go to my desk kiosk where I can put in my personal comfort, based upon what temperature setting I want to have, in that particular specific area. There's an under desk sensor that knows that I've checked in for the day, and at the appropriate time asks me what I would like for lunch, and then brings up a menu on my mobile device. And I can either go take a nice little stroll and then pick that up, or in some cases have that be delivered to me. And then my day goes on, as from an employee persona until my day is done. And similarly, if I'm a buildings operations person, I get alerts about everything that's going on inside the buildings, whether that's malfunctioning equipment or set points that need to be changed dynamically that get reconfigured in real time, or require a technician dispatch in order to
Hmm.
go bring a faulty part, as well as being able to visualize all of your properties in a digital twin, and seeing, not having to have somebody physically in each of the properties, but to see kind of the macro environment of the space, and understanding all of the different hot spots inside of it, and being able to zoom in and drill down into that space. So the virtualization of buildings
Hmm.
is well underway.
Hmm.
The different examples that I gave are things that have been brought together from several different customers that I have. But you can put all of those together and see the art of the possible, which
Yeah.
is rather
Hmm.
than us designing the building and saying, here's your building, occupy it. It is a building that is ever evolving based upon who's actually coming into and using that building in real time. And that's what's becoming autonomous about the building. It's just like,
Hmm.
and the vehicle, that the Waymo that is picking up a guest at 3 a.m. At the Scottsdale Marriott, i.e. me, and driving me to Sky Harbor Airport,
Yeah.
without there being a single
In
other
Phoenix.
person in the car, right?
Yeah. Like I've
Same
been
thing
on
with
that.
the building. You're not
Yeah.
pressing any more buttons on the elevator. The elevator is telling the system is telling you which elevator to go to, and you go in, and it brings you to the right floor, right?
Well, it's like
So
the novel idea of, hey, you can make an office building that people want to go to.
exactly,
And
yeah.
in a world of remote work, that's important. And you're removing friction.
Yeah,
and just
absolutely. I mean, I'm a sci-fi geek, right? And so, I always watch sci-fi movies and shows, and I'm like, oh, is that possible today? Could we do that? So it's always fun for me
yeah.
to kind of see how the world is evolving on a day-to-day basis.
Well, the world is bright. VJ, thank you for coming on and sharing your leadership vision. Johnson Controls and what you're doing over there is something for all of us to take note of. And thank you for coming on and be willing to share your thoughts. It's a lot of fun today.
Thanks so much, Ben, for having me, and it's always a pleasure, being part of this podcast and your style. So look forward to sharing more with the broader viewership.